Worldwide a Coalition Media Network, here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 98 Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course, these and all other shows will live in perpetuity at our website, the mothership, if you will, coalitionradio.us. Simply access the YouTube channel at the top of our broadside. It's been a provocative week here, both in Rhode Island and nationally. We faced the specter of yet another mass shooting, if you will, this time at the YouTube headquarters. At the same time, on a local level, the crony corporatism issue continues to raise its ugly head. In just a few moments, Brian Doherty of Reason Magazine, the official, the favorite media source for libertarians here in Rhode Island, the liberty community, as well as folks looking for insight, thoughtful analysis, and an accessible yet sophisticated environment of today's news stories. An alternative look, as opposed to being spoon-fed, if you will, the normal regurgitated pablum that one gets from major local media. So we've got a couple of stories to discuss. On a local level, Speaker Mattiello is addressing again, reinvestigating again, taxpayer subsidies into the Pawtucket Red Sox Stadium. And at the same time, we're looking at the Commerce Corporation of the state of Rhode Island, yet another attempt to build a super tower that will hover over Rhode Island. What's wrong with that? Sharon Steele, taxpayer activist, community activist, will be joining us in the 8 o'clock hour to discuss that. But joining me live on the line is Brian Doherty. He is the senior editor of Reason Magazine, both in its print form and can be found online at reason.com. Well, he's appeared everywhere. His work has been in the New York Times, the Glenn Beck Show, Fox Channel, the O'Reilly Factor. He's been published nationally. Mr. Doherty is also the Warren Brookes Fellow in Environmental Journalism at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI, and served as managing editor at Regulation Magazine in the early 90s. Mr. Doherty, for the first time, welcome to the Coalition. Thank you for joining us on a Friday night.
Thank you for having me.
You wrote a few fairly provocative articles in this week, if you will, in the last week at Reason.com. The first of which addresses squarely the notion that Congress could have absolutely done nothing to prevent what was the beginning of, and potentially could have been a mass shooting, if you will. I'm not sure anymore where the boundaries are, what is now ordinary crime, or what constitutes a mass shooting anymore, but clearly what happened at YouTube was challenging on a number of levels. Explain what you mean by that, and give folks a little bit of insight into your thought process.
You know, my first reaction when that news broke, as someone who's, has written a book about gun control, and I write on gun issues a lot, my first thought was that there wasn't actually anything intelligent to say as a policy matter about this event. And then it occurred to me, well, maybe that point itself is worth making. It's worth making the point that, and I thought this when I got an email from Gabrielle Giffords, you remember the former congresswoman who was herself the victim of a shooting. Ms. Giffords sent an email out within an hour of this happening, lamenting that somehow this incident raised the question, I'm quoting her now, how much longer do we have to wait before Congress takes action to make our communities safer from gun violence? Mm-hmm. How many more breaking news updates about active shooters do we have to live through? How many more lives will be lost? And I began thinking, what does she mean? This woman used a handgun, apparently semi-automatic handgun. It wasn't one of these so-called assault weapons that people like her think need to be banned. While she exhibited lots of public signs of behavior that we might colloquially call crazy, she had not yet been adjudicated by any court or any mental health professional as being mentally ill and thus supposedly not legally able to get a gun. The state of California in which she lived has most of the set of what people like Ms. Giffords call common sense gun measures, gun control measures, which aren't usually very common sense. So it struck me, as it always does, actually, in the wake of these colorful crimes, that there's no actual connection between the incident that's being used as an excuse for more gun control and the gun control. And one of the reasons why, Second Amendment people start to wonder, hey, isn't what you guys really want is for no one to have a weapon at all? Is that the only law that one could imagine if one actually believed it could be effective in a country that already has over 300 million weapons, is a law that, like, with a snap of your finger made every weapon disappear. That's not happening. Mm-hmm. So none of these laws actually have any relevance to the incident. It's always theater. It's a hard thing to say because, it does involve, luckily in this case, just people who are wounded, but, often involves people who are killed, and that's tragic and that's horrible. And people sort of use how tragic and horrible it is as a sort of sleight of hand to convince us that, well, we're going to claim that we're going to do something that's going to, violate millions of people's right to armed self-defense, and that's worth it because it's going to prevent these deaths, even though in almost no case would it actually have prevented the deaths, or in this case, the injury. So I just wanted to remind Ms. Giffords and people who listen to Ms. Giffords that talking about laws and talking about congressional inaction in reaction to this event is completely irrelevant. And it does seem that this event hasn't had the media legs that the Florida school shooting had. We can speculate about the reasons for that. One of it may be that no one, that there wasn't a big body count, but whatever it is, in any case, almost all of the laws that these people advocate as a reaction, supposedly, to these tragedies would not have actually affected the tragedy. So you do have to wonder, what is your guys' purpose in this? And their purpose is mostly just to eliminate the ability for armed self-defense among most Americans, or at least that's what I assume it must be.
Well, now what's interesting to me is on a couple of different levels, you have interesting challenges here. On the first level, is anyone tracking the mean time between an actual shooting event and the time that the first fundraising letter goes out from some craven politician who is seeking to establish some sort of moral relativity, as well as, well, let's be blunt, get a little of the money. I mean, the first law of first responders when regards to any of these events is that, and I'm nearly quoting here, is that in the first hour everything is wrong. So
right.
Haven't we learned yet that, and this particular example is particularly egregious, that everything you think is wrong, and you have to follow a plan as opposed to, again, jumping to conclusions. Do you think they get that yet?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because even I didn't get it, and if you go look at that article I wrote, you'll see it's filled with updates, because I too wrote it within 2 hours of it happening, within an hour of getting Gifford's email, and I had some things in it that had been reported by legitimate news sources at the time that turned out not to be true. One of those was apparently cops were saying that the killer was acquainted with, not the killer, but the shooter was acquainted with one of her victims, and that apparently turned out not to be true. But the larger point that I was trying to make remained, which is that whatever we learn about her and her motives and what type of person she is, and none of them are actually going to be relevant to law or policy, unless you believe, and I hope most Americans don't believe this, that it's worthwhile and proper to restrict the rights of thousands or millions of innocent people just because one person who shares a characteristic with them, did something wrong. Whether that be you're a gun owner, or even you're someone with a mental health problem, or you're someone who owns a magazine, that holds more than 10, that none of these actually give a legitimate excuse to crack down further on the overwhelmingly, massively, 99.99999% of gun owners in America, assault weapons, whatever you mean by that, owners of detachable magazines, that hold more than 10. Whatever category you put it in, nearly all of them are owned and used peacefully, never to harm anyone else, even though you'll hear people say nonsense like, oh, this kind of weapon, its only value is to kill people. I'm like, that's strange, because there's tens of millions of them out there that are never used to kill people. So clearly their only value is not just to kill people. But
right. I mean, here at the Coalition, we like to say that possession shouldn't be indicative of intent. It's aggression that should be indicative of intent.
Exactly.
It's troubling too, and you alluded to this, and here at the Coalition, we're not really big on the conspiracy theorists. We're not obsessive over the quote unquote media wars and the media bias. we just like to walk past that normally. But as someone who's intimately involved in the issue and also has a pretty topside perspective of what the country is thinking, do you find it troubling that since it didn't fit the normal narrative, that the media shutdown this was almost instantaneous for all the reasons?
It became less interesting to them for sure. But of course, I can't get too upset about that, because part of my point in writing this was this shouldn't necessarily be a story of vast national, cultural, political interest. It's a local crime story is really what it was. Though obviously, as you're alluding to, had it been one more angry, toxic white male or whatever, it probably would have had more legs. But I'm perfectly happy to not see this story being treated as it's of massive national, political, and cultural importance, because I don't think it is.
Right, because at the same time, Drudge and the normal rabble-rousers, the tin pan bangers, are full of stories of knifings, if you will, in Greater London, and they'll use a pejorative term associated with London and its current mayor that I'm going to again walk past. Surely trying to juxtapose the most recent wave of American crime violence, with what goes on in countries where weaponry is not so omnipresent, if you will.
Yeah. It's definitely worth reminding Americans that, violence and murder does not equal guns, and guns do not equal violence and murder. Some of the biggest public mass casualty events, terror events, have been done with motor vehicles. And if you're obsessed with the whole assault weapon distinction, the most high casualty school shooting event, Virginia Tech, a few years back, was done with handguns. Like it's just wrong to assume that this particular variety of weapon, which of course was not used in the YouTube thing, is somehow worthy of attack. It's just completely irrational. I think they only do it because they want to feel like we can get away with banning some kind of gun, right, even though it's going to have utterly meaningless in terms of public safety, and then we'll go from there. But it's nonsense.
Well, and what's more troubling from our perspective, and I love your reflection on this, these situations, and in fact, in your subtitles you alluded to, it became clear that this woman is being characterized by those same, what's the term du jour, grin grabbers, as being just plain nuts. Now, regardless of whether she's just plain nuts, to me the more troubling narrative is it's being used to position across the country states to go after these red flag laws. Now in Rhode Island, we had an overwhelming response against it. And understand Rhode Island is possibly one of the bluest states in the nation, certainly a bastion of liberalism. There was an overwhelming reaction from the public against the passage of red flag laws. In a moment almost unparalleled in recent political history, literally we're a tiny state, thousands of Rhode Islanders descended upon the State House for the red flag hearings to petition against them. But are states everywhere reacting with these red flag laws where, is some form of civil commitment without the process and the due process of civil commitment?
It's definitely a liver issue after the Parkland thing in Florida. California, by the way, I will know, already has had laws like that. And it's alarming to me. You can get in all sorts of conflicts with the people in your life, and it doesn't necessarily seem right to me that they should have the power to deprive you of the right to armed self-defense just because they're upset with you. That there should be more procedures, due process, etc., in place for these sort of things. And Governor Jerry Brown, amazingly, bless him, actually last year vetoed an expansion of some of those laws. They were going to apply it to school officials and other people in your life, and he shut that down, which is good for him. But definitely, because the funny thing about Parkland is that it is probably one of the one such events where a law that they propose maybe actually could have worked. Like if someone had been able, because that kid had exhibited so much signs of violent insanity. But still, you do need to remember, if you have any respect for armed self-defense at all, that laws like this are absolutely going to bedevil and harm 100 times as many innocent people as they're ever going to stop any potential mass shooter, which is something that is still, we remember them because they're violent and terrifying, and we get hit over the head with them for weeks, but they're still shockingly rare.
Mm-hmm. And in your opinion, based on what appears to be actually a declining level of incidence of these events, is it simply the 24-hour media cycle that whips these into a kind of a yellow fever, yellow journalism frenzy?
Yeah. People are not aware, shockingly, of and you are, I'm sure, that the basic trend in gun deaths in America, especially gun homicide deaths from the early 90s until now, it's been nearly cut in half. And there's been a tiny little blip up in the last couple of years, but still, compared to historically, the problem of gun violence, the alleged epidemic of gun violence. It's funny. I said that gun controllers, if they wanted to, could just declare victory and go home. They could say something like, we passed the Brady Act in 1994, and then gun homicides have gone down by half since then. It's like, great, you win, But they never want to do that. They want to keep acting like it. They use the phrase epidemic, which is just inappropriate in every possible way.
Right. And to your point, declare peace in our times and, roll out whatever the flavor statistics that they want to roll out, as they usually do, and again, just walk away and live happily. But that's never really how it works, though, is it? I mean, there's that constant insistence upon encroaching on every facet of day-to-day life.
Which is why some of us on the Second Amendment side, and we especially think this when that former Supreme Court justice said it in the New York Times. Stevens, I think it was. Yeah, let's just repeal the Second Amendment. It's like sometimes you'll hear them say, "Oh, no one's wanting to take our guns." It's like, no, they actually do want to take our guns. They definitely do, and they shouldn't be allowed to for numerous reasons. The most important one, and I try to use this argument with sort of your civil rights, Black Lives Matter type activists, is to point out that if you created a situation in this country where police were obligated by law to be going out there and collecting those 300 million guns out there, like, what do you think that's going to do to domestic police violence? And who do you think is going to get the short end of that stick? It's like they're basically asking for a bloodbath against the poor and minorities, and it's a bad idea, and the problem that it allegedly is intended to solve is a problem that's been shrunk in half. It's probably going to continue shrinking.
Well, and isn't it the ultimate irony here is that you've got yet another narrative that's been going on almost since a year ago, January. And by the way, for the record, I'm the chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. For folks who are just tuning in right now, I am certainly by no means a fan of Donald Trump, really on any level, whether on just about everything. This week's tariffs are just the latest in, an exercise in dumb and dumber, as we call it here. But to me, the irony is that, one of the intents of the founders, and I love your opinion on the true nature of the Second Amendment, but one of the intents of the founders, if you will, has been widely reported, is the ability to, overthrow a monarchy. And yet at the same time, the very folks who are claiming that you've got a fascist government in place that is truly intent on doing evil to the populace, particularly the marginalized us among us, are the same ones willing to, quote unquote, neuter that historical opposition that a well-armed militia could purport to have. I mean, is it just a failure in logic, or is just all of their issues purely emotional?
I think that the guns just kind of put people over the edge, and I'm not totally unsympathetic to that. I mean, guns are used as tools in lots of horrible tragedies. Like, I don't think anyone's crazy for having a visceral, like, oh boy, wouldn't it be better if there just were no guns? I'm like, I don't know, maybe it would be, but there are hundreds of millions of guns. They are relevant to people's self-defense. They are almost overwhelmingly owned and used peacefully. And releasing the police of America on a mission to grab them all is just going to be such a nightmare of civil rights and such a nightmare of deaths. And I'm quite confident that an attempt to ban and confiscate even categories of weapons, like the so-called assault weapon, would cause more violence, death, and chaos than the free purchase of them currently does. And people should be aware, you probably are, that rifles of any variety, of which the so-called assault rifle is a subset, are used in about 3% of American homicides.
Right.
They just have nothing to do with the gun homicide problem, and all this talk about banning them really does just seem like it's the left, just throwing their weight around, just proving that we can do it, and they should stop trying because it's not good for civic peace. It's not good for any demonstrable problem, and it does make gun owners, legitimate self-defensive, play gun owners, think that they mean them harm, and it's a bad idea.
Can you, and we're going to take a very quick break in a second, but explain to folks your personal historical understanding and your personal philosophy as regarding the existence of the Second Amendment. Why is it
Sure.
here, and why must it be maintained?
It's there because the right to self-defense is one of the most core human rights. And it's funny, you can know that this is true because in the libertarian world you'll often get people challenging you with, don't you realize government is necessary? Government is supposed to be necessary to preserve our lives, and we all know it's an absolute incontrovertible fact that the policing function of the government is never, ever, ever going to actually be able to defend your life in any specific incident in which your life needs to be defended. The right to life is one of the rights that we supposedly create government to preserve. So it's never within government's legitimate power to take away from us the most useful tools for self-defense. And this was completely understood by the Founding Fathers. The stuff about militias, everyone was considered, not obviously back then it was white males who were considered, the polis, which is something that we thankfully have changed. But the militia mentioned in the Second Amendment does not mean some specialized body of trained people. It means the people in general. It's unfortunate that phrase is in there because it allows people to sort of sophistically claim that the Second Amendment does not mean what it clearly means, and the analysis and breakdown of it is not easily done verbally. But the decision in the 2008 Heller case sort of lays out the reasons why it's just nuts to insist that the Second Amendment was not intended to prevent the government from being able to bar us from using weapons for self-defense.
Right. I mean, I believe you and I firmly agree that it's critical to point out that a Constitution does not have power in of itself, does not create power in of itself. It is really a written record, a reference piece to memorialize, if you will, the rights that we were given simply by existing. That the Second Amendment, that is a function of the right to self-defense, a belief so fundamental to our legal system that is in fact a legitimate defense against essentially taking someone else's life. So
exactly.
So then why then, whether it be 200 years ago and it's a musket, now within it's an AR-15, or who knows, 500 years from now when it's some pulse-emitting laser built on a flux capacitor, whatever it takes at any time to provide defense, that is what you as a free man or woman should be able to own. It's quite frankly, it's that simple. But that seems to have been lost upon an entire generation. Is that because of the failure of our educational system or the failure of our family structure to teach civil liberties? I mean, what happened? How did we get to this point where we don't understand the fundamental right?
That's a really big question. I don't know how to explain giant sociocultural trends, but I'll push back a little and say that actually since the Heller decision a decade ago, the proper interpretation of the Second Amendment is coming back. It's not that it's not that situation's been getting worse and worse and worse for hundreds of years. It was very bad for most of the 20th century, and now it's getting better. Like almost no one understood the Second Amendment properly in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Now enough people do that we had a very bare majority of the Supreme Court recognizing it. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court seems to be very eager to stay away from the Second Amendment now. They've been refusing to take any Second Amendment related case ever since 2010, and I hope that changes. However, I only hope that changes with the current majority, because if someone with an improper understanding of the Second Amendment, ends up on that court, then I'll be happy. It is worth remembering that that understanding is fragile. It was 5-4. It could change at any time,
Right.
and I hope it doesn't.
Right. Folks, if you're just joining us, Brian Doherty, he is the senior editor at Reason Magazine. We are blessed here at the Coalition to have frequent visitors from said magazine. As we like to point out, there are a few publications which involve independent thought, independent analysis, independent reporting, original reporting. Simply, Reason is not content merely to regurgitate or reflect on other folks' analysis. They create their own. And as such, it should be appointment reading. You can subscribe at reason.com. It is worthy of your financial support as it is worthy of your daily analysis. What I love about Reason is that, and you'll hear me say this again and again on the Coalition, is that it handles some of the most sensitive, challenging issues of our times, but it manages to provide analysis that is highly accessible so that folks like highly talented writers and journalists, like investigators and folks like Mr. Doherty, somehow manage to translate it so that you and I can read this, learn, grow, and understand. So, we continue to salute your efforts there because, absent that, I'm not quite sure where we'd be. Moving on to another piece that you wrote this week is particular interest to the libertarians amongst us. One of the most enigmatic, confusing, challenging, at the same time engaging figures of the recent libertarian movement is none other than Austin Petersen. Now, for folks listening for the first time, Austin Petersen was a serious contender for the Libertarian Party's presidential nomination in 2016 and continues to retain the support of folks, particularly young people, many of whom are on the rebound, if you will, from not so much the Ron Paul movement, but particularly the Rand Paul movement, and who look to Mr. Petersen as a future player in the larger, more global liberty movement. He is running for the Republican nomination to challenge none other than Claire McCaskill in Missouri. And as such, again, we talk on the Coalition about onion issues. If there was ever an election which was multifaceted, because I'm not, you look at Ms. McCaskill, she's clearly a challenging figure politically. You look at the purported Republican favorite, if you will, for the nomination, he's got challenges. And yet at the same time, if you're a libertarian, you quite frankly, Mr. Petersen can make you nuts because of his recent defection to the Republican Party. He wrote, Mr. Petersen came out and opined, and he was the second libertarian most recently to do this. We have a libertarian in Michigan who has came out with a campaign platform that he wants to arm the homeless. But Mr. Petersen came out and thought, well, you sum it up. What's his approach, and what do you think of it?
What he did, and it's interesting because one thing he's showing, I think, and I asked him about this when I interviewed him the other day, is he's taking a position that's so radical that you normally associate it with the Libertarian Party. I mean, I'm unfamiliar with any other Republican who was bold enough to announce, as Petersen did, that he believes that private civilians in the United States should have the right to own fully automatic weapons without having to pay a large tax stamp and be able to own ones that are newer than 1986, which we're currently not able to do. He believes, and we'll see if this is correct, that that opinion is going to play quite well in Missouri. He even thinks it will play well with Democrats. He believes that his state does not have the gun grabber mentality. He points to some things that have happened on the state level in Missouri before, like the Missouri Senate, for example, a few years ago, tried to nullify certain federal gun laws in their state. They didn't quite manage to do it. You can conceal carry in Missouri without any kind of permit. Missouri's pretty strong on gun rights, and he also this is putting words in his mouth a little. It's not that he said this publicly, but I kind of feel like one thing that Petersen admired about Donald Trump, and not so much his policies, as he admired how bold Donald Trump was. Donald Trump was willing to say things that most respectable people considered outrageous at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think Austin sort of has the feeling like that's the political mood in America today, that if you believe in what you're saying and you can back it up, it doesn't matter if most people are going to go, oh my gosh, I'm shocked to hear you say that. He's like, just say it and stand behind it, and people will respect that. We're not going to know if that works for him for a few months now, but more power to him, because it's certainly it's not something that I have publicly said a lot, but I do believe it. It's like you were saying earlier, like if it's a weapon and it exists and it has the capacity to be used for legitimate self-defense, if anyone can have it, why can't I? And there's not really a good reason for that. And Austin said that, and more power to him. Austin has a history of getting booted off of Facebook for giving away AR-15s and the like. So he's good at sort of standing his ground on Second Amendment issues, and he thinks that he knows it excites his audience. He says he was able to fundraise really well off of his machine gun announcement. So let's see. And if it works out for him, I think that's going to be a game changer, because, for both libertarians and, libertarian-minded people who decide that they have a better chance of winning if they run as Republican, which I think is what motivated Austin. It's not that he, changed who he was politically when he switched party affiliations. He just came to the decision, and we'll see if he's right, that you can be a consistent libertarian and win a primary in the Republican Party. And, maybe, I hope so.
Well, it's interesting because Missouri is such represents so many political challenges. Folks forget that in the wake of the riots, there were actually two Justice Department investigations. The first Justice Department investigation that was widely publicized was the riots themselves. Less publicized was the mood of the public relative to policing in that state, and the perception, particularly in the minority communities, let's say reality, that they are in fact were the targets and are the targets of a highly militarized policing machine. So I'm wondering if Mr. Peterson, recognizing the anti-authoritarian mood in this country, even in a state that is both displays some of the most rural aspects of America, but while simultaneously displaying inner cities that are unparalleled, is onto something there. And as you said, if people responded, and to me what was fascinating, the response wasn't, oh, there he goes, it's one of these nutcases. The response was markedly more measured than it would have been even, say, 2, 3, 4 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. I didn't, I was a little shocked that he wasn't, didn't become a subject of one of these modern, mob, things where, everyone in the world is like, we must drive this man from polite society for saying such an outrageous thing, It seems like it was okay. I still, I wouldn't bet a lot of money on him getting the nomination. I mean, he's got people he's running against with sort of more clout within the Republican Party in the state. I'm not putting money down on his success, but you definitely couldn't say that, oh, he shot himself in the foot, colloquially, with this announcement. There might be something to his notion that, saying things that a lot of people consider outrageous is a new normal now. It's the way to win, and we'll see. I try to stay out of making predictions about how elections will go, but good for him for doing what he's doing.
Well, and in the second, you've got 2 or 3 areas of, I'll call them a combination of legal, social, and political challenges. The 2 most prominent, of course, are the war on drugs and the war on guns. And in both cases, you've finally got leadership, whether it be libertarian leadership or in certain isolated circumstances, Republican leadership, that post-2016, a recognition and looking back that we weren't libertarian enough, that if we stayed true to our roots, that we might have actually realized that libertarian moment, or at least done a better job of it. I think it simultaneously acts to put the traditional to a small government leadership, if you will, that they actually have to start being true to it as opposed to giving a biannual or every 4-year lip service to it. Because if not, there are people like Mr. Peterson or folks in the libertarian movement who not only give voice to the philosophy, but actually believe it and are willing to stake their political future on it. Does that force the Republicans to come to, at least at some level, come back to their quote-unquote liberty roots, or is the party hopelessly lost to the Trumpers? I don't know. I'd be interested in your reflection on that.
If you ask me to guess now, I feel like it's hopelessly lost to the Trumpers. But Austin is putting himself out there to experiment with something different, and it's great. And I love the LP, but I certainly do not object to people who think, I can be a libertarian politician and compete in the Republican Party. I think if you think you can do that, do it. And Austin, there may be issues where Austin has softened on what I consider the full libertarian message. I don't know of any of them off the top of my head. I just don't want to fully endorse everything he said or done. But this machine gun thing is super bold. Again, I was shocked. I'm like, gee, why are you even running as a Republican? You sound like a crazy LP guy. And he thinks it's the right thing to do, and he thinks it'll work. And we'll see. I think his results will tell us a lot about whether the Republican Party has any room for this kind of stuff, because his race and his state is probably a classic case where if it's going to work anywhere, maybe it'll work there. So let's see.
Right. You're speaking to someone who testifies routinely at the State House here in Rhode Island, and each time I testify, I preface my remarks with an explanation of what a voluntarist is and the fact that I am one, which, as you can imagine, in a state that's kind of the Dumb and Dumber spin-off, if you will, of Massachusetts, is confusing to them. We've only got a few minutes left, and again, if you're just joining us for the first time, Brian Doherty has joined us. He is a senior editor at Reason magazine. Reason has been very gracious over the past year and a half or so at the coalition. Mr. Doherty, Mr. Welch, Ms. Brown, just a wide range of columnists have spent time with us on Friday nights, giving voice to some of the great writing that they routinely turn out, and we're grateful for that. Of course, you are listening to the Coalition, coalitionradio.us, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, and of course on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. If you missed the first part of this broadcast, it will be available on our website. In the minutes that we have left, you just actually touched on what I want to discuss with you, the mood of the country, if you will, and 2A and the events of the last few months, I think are a really good reflection of this. The Trump administration, which is ostensibly Republican, has not had many challengers beyond, say, Mr. Flake, and on a very low level, the Mitt Romneys of the world. They are turned the traditional legalistic, constitutional viewpoint of the Republican Party, quite frankly, upside down. This week the word trade war is being issued, not in response to shall we say, a Democratic Party president who is beholden to labor unions. We're using the word trade war at the instigation of a Republican president, House, and Senate acting at least somewhat in concert together. Is the absence of anyone willing to chain themselves rhetorically to the White House fence and scream bloody murder about this trade interventionism, or their failure to really aggressively defend 2A? Does this bode poorly for liberty in the Republican Party in general?
It sure does. You laid it all out there. I can only agree. The power of Trump, and I get it. Trump won. He's their guy who won. I don't think a lot of Republicans, whether voters or politicians, have a really strong, sense of policy correctness that's liberty-minded. I think there's a great sense of just my team versus the other team. Mm-hmm. Trump won. They're on Trump's side. So what Trump's for, they're for, and it's gonna take. I think what's going to have to happen for things to turn around is Trump is going to have to lose, and I'm not saying he will, But if he does not, if Trump runs again, if Trump makes it through his first term, runs again, and wins, that's going to be terrible, terrible news for the Republican Party in liberty terms. It's great for the LP because it's going to leave a lot of space for them. But yeah, Trump's got to lose. Like there's too many Americans, voters or politicians, who are just team-minded and they're victory-minded, or they don't have a complicated, nuanced understanding of liberty and economics and how free markets work, and they're just following the boss. And hopefully when he's not the boss anymore, things can turn around. But it don't look good right now, that's for sure.
Yes, I mean, Matt Welch, and again, Reason.com. When this show is over, please go there. Matt Welch wrote a stunning indictment of Larry Kudlow, who has, if you're not familiar with Kudlow, he's been a staple on a variety of media. He's been a staple on the talking head circuit. He routinely appeared up until recently on the John Batchelder show out of New York City. Routinely, his mantra was free markets, free markets, free markets. We were treated this year. This is why this has been an astonishing year for me, because at one point I had the Senate Minority Leader of the United States Senate, a Democrat, actually crying foul about the deficit, and now I am treated to the sight of Mr. Kudlow as ham-handedly as it was defending a trade war. For the love of God, man, what is going on in this country? Is this what did Jerry Seinfeld call it? Are we in bizarro world?
Yeah, it's like I said, they're just following the boss, and with Kudlow, it's funny, I was saying a lot of voters, a lot of politicians never really understood the liberty message. Kudlow's even sadder because, I believe he did. He wrote so much good stuff over the years. He does get it. He's not just someone being whipsawed in ignorance. He is someone who is willingly deciding that I'm going to abandon all of my knowledge and all my principles in order to have a job, with the president, and it's a shame. But the good part again is lose the president, and the awareness of some of these issues might come back. But you got to lose the president if we have 8 years of Trump. It's the LP's game to lose at that point, I guess.
Well, if we can herd the cats, if you will. My disappointment with Representative Flake, and I'm not asking you to comment on this, is profound. There's an individual who sort of had a deathbed conversion to, I'll call it at least a somewhat rational yet pragmatic approach to the liberty movement at some level, and the unwillingness of quote unquote principled liberty folks to stay on the field of battle. I would have much preferred. I would have been thrilled to see Mr. Flake engage in the primary process, to which he clearly was afraid of losing, and gone down in flames simply by using that as a bully pulpit for some of the more provocative statements he's made. Instead, it would appear that the Republican response is just to sound the horns, retreat, and sadly actually go gently into that good night. And like you, I find it highly, highly troubling because we've been treated since the decline of the Bush years. We've been treated to the 8 years of the Obama regime of a steadfast adherence to some level of constitutionalism, some level of liberty. At least that was the selling point. And quite frankly, we were lied to. And I like you said, Trump's got to lose. He's got to lose badly. Again, I know you don't like to prognosticate. Do you hold hopes in that the midterm election will be a wake-up call? Is the liberal tidal wave about to happen from your spidey sense?
It looks that way in 2018, but I don't think that's going to be enough to damage Trump. I think if Trump wants to stick it out, and if no legal troubles arise, and if he doesn't just get sick of the whole thing, he's going to run again. And and I think most Republicans are going to line up behind him no matter what. Of course, currently, so many Americans claim to be independent that you can't really make any predictions by knowing the strict partisan identification just covers about half of the electorate now. But yeah, he's one. Those who see the Republican Party as their team, he's just their guy. And the sellouts of constitutionalist and liberty principle don't mean anything. I'm sorry to see it. I didn't understand it. I didn't predict it. I didn't think Trump would win in the first place. So I was humbled by that, and I'm not making any further predictions. Certainly not any optimistic ones.
There you go. And final thought. Clearly, the Second Amendment is under a brutal ground fire. My sense is that the current wave of attacks is not going to fade as quickly as past as it has in past years. I do think the Florida issue's got legs, if you will, politically. Is your sense that things are going to get worse in terms of the Second Amendment as a result of Parkland and the current mood, or will this in effect kind of fade away, perhaps not so gently as in the past?
No, I'm finally worried about it, and this Parkland, for whatever reason, is the first one that really has worked the way the enemies of the Second Amendment want it to work. People were saying after the Connecticut one, that would be the end for the Second Amendment. It wasn't, but states, New York, Vermont, Florida, that I know of, and there's probably others I'm not know of, have already passed restrictive laws along the lines we were talking about earlier, where you can make a phone call and have someone's gun rights taken away, and magazine restrictions and age restrictions, 18 to 21. It's happening really fast. I don't think it's going to happen on the federal level, just because that does seem to be one issue that Republicans on the federal level, are not going to give in on too quickly, though, maybe they will, but it's not my read that they will. But on the state level, yeah, a lot of bad things are going to happen, and there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, and the Supreme Court is going to have to come back around and actually say, okay, what does the Second Amendment mean after Heller? Because currently, to spell it out, all it means is that you can't completely take away the right to have a commonly owned and used weapon in the home for self-defense, like anything about public carry, anything about banning certain types of weapons, anything about banning certain ages. That's still kind of up in the air, and I would like the Supreme Court, while we have the current majority, to have the nerve to take that up again. But I feel like they're not going to, because they do, they claim to be above politics, but they're really not. And I think that they kind of feel like we've gone as far as we're comfortable with the Second Amendment right now. You can't totally take away every weapon from everyone, but you can do a lot of other dumb things, and we're seeing it happen already, and I am afraid we're going to see more of it on the state level.
Well, Brian Doherty, he again is the senior editor of Reason Magazine. You grace us with your presence tonight. Thank you for taking the time to get involved up here in Little Rhodey. I hope you'll take some hope away that there is a growing libertarian movement here that has evidenced itself on a number of levels, whether it be against the war on drugs, the war on the Second Amendment, the war on the Fourth Amendment, and the continued fight against corporatism. We'd like to think that the Coalition Talk Radio is a part of that effort, but the ability to reach out to folks at Reason has been has really, from a morale perspective, and just sort of keeping in touch with the outside world, has been invaluable to us. So thank you so very, very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good night. Folks, we're going to take a quick break right now. Of course, Brian Doherty, senior editor, Reason Magazine, their in-house Second Amendment specialist, if you will, talking about the legal, societal, political pressures involved in your fundamental right to defend yourself. Folks, we're going to take a quick break right now. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network, here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Botza Street, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. We're going to take a quick few minutes to spend quality time. We'll realign the camera and take our Yacht Club soda break. This past hour was sponsored by Beacon Shipping and Logistics, beaconshippingandlogistics.com, an international automobile shipper with a local feel. Imagine, if you will, if you could move cars, automobiles, trucks, planes, whatever, all right, around the country, around the world, whether it be that car that you bought online, whether it be that car you were gifted by Aunt Susie. If you could do that efficiently, cost effectively, maybe it's that car you won. If you could do that with a hometown connection here in Warwick, Rhode Island, you'd love to do it. Talk to Eric and his crew, 1-855-3-SHIP-IT. That's beaconshippingandlogistics.com. I work with them on a professional level during the day. You should too. And as we always say, those folks willing to support, to endorse, to sponsor independent media deserve your support. Clearly, they're willing to take on controversial issues with sophisticated perspectives that are not easy for some to digest. They're willing to support that, merits your respect, your loyalty, and your support. Beaconshippingandlogistics.com, 855-3-SHIP-IT. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. We'll have our Yacht Club soda break. And then joining me in the next segment is Sharon Steele. I met Sharon for the first time during what I like to call the ProvSox 1.0, the first go-around. Now in a moment not unlike Glenn Close in the final scenes of Fatal Attraction, it appeared that maybe, perhaps, we're being treated to again. Or as the late, great Carol Burnett show would say, Carol's still with us, thank God, but she used to run a skit called As the Stomach Turns. This is ProvSox 2.0. Are we about to see a resurgence of the effort to resuscitate the ProvSox negotiations, or are these merely a continued analysis that will only occupy time in the political space? Folks, we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about an issue that and shame on me, that I haven't spent enough time on. And that, of course, is a property development that's about to reach its next stage in development here in Providence. And what that means both for the Providence skyline, the Providence economy, quality of life issues. And that's something Sharon Steele has been intimately involved in here in Rhode Island for a number of years. So, folks, stay tuned. Much, much, much more to come. We'll be right back.